Excuse me. I'd like to welcome everybody here today for listen to Grant. It's going to be a great presentation. We're excited about this. He's deserved this award. It's well earned. I would be a way to say it. So I'd like to welcome everybody here. Glad you're here. Hope you enjoyed the lunch. Usually pretty good food, and there's plenty over here, so come get more if you need to reload. So we'd like to welcome new members and students that are here. I know we got students from the Salt Lake Community College. Please raise your hand so everybody knows who you are. Glad they're here. They're going to be coming to the Core Center after for a tour, so we're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Any new members that would like to introduce themselves? Okay. We know there's a few new members, but that's fine. That's fine. Please.
This is Melanie Wilkerson. She's new in our abandoned mine reclamation program in oil, gas, and mining. And she's an urban planning degree, but she wants to learn about everything.
We probably could work geology in there somewhere. Be my guess. Grant, would you introduce your family that's here?
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure. I'm so glad to have so many of my family here with me. A lot of you know my wife, Julie. This is my son, Tyler, his wife, Clara, McKenna and Harvey. Emily's my daughter, and Jacob's my son. Their husband and wife are earning money, so. My sister, Barbara, my brother, Bryce, and his wife, Stephanie. And then I think I've got some other siblings and my mother watching through the webcast. I hope it's working.
Okay. Paul should have that one taken care of back there, so hope they got logged in. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. We are certainly glad that you're here today. Just a reminder, we're doing sort of our membership drive, so if you could go online and fill out the membership, and if you can, we'd like you to think about donating to the scholarship fund as well. We also got forms back here that you could fill out and do that here if you'd like, but we're trying to get the membership in and dues paid and get those services going. Go look at our new website if you haven't been there yet. We got lots of information there. We're starting to get more on there all the time, and you can do your membership information and renew your dues there. So we'd like to encourage that if we can. Mark, would you make the announcement, please?
So I'm sorry to have to tell you that if you don't already know, Diane Nielsen passed away last week. Dennis and Diane Nielsen showed up at Dartmouth College where I was an undergraduate in 1971, and were graduate students there, and Diane was the first woman. When I was a student at Dartmouth, there were no women. It's co-ed now, but it happened after I left. And Diane was the first woman to get a PhD in geology from Dartmouth College. And so Diane and Dennis and I and my wife have had a very long relationship, and unfortunately, it appears that she had a heart valve failure. She had an artificial heart valve on the 7th of November. She leaves a husband of 49 years, Dennis Nielsen, who's also a PhD geologist, 2 children, 2 grandchildren, and baby coming, another grandchild coming in January. For those of you who don't know who Diane Nielsen was, she worked for a very brief period of time at the Utah Geological Survey, where she was hired by Genevieve Atwood. 6 months or so after she was hired, Democratic governor, that's an odd thing to say in Utah, Democratic Governor Scott Matheson appointed her to be the director of the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, which she did until 1994, when, that was in 1984. She did that until 1994 when she was appointed the executive director of the Department of Environmental Quality by Governor Mike Leavitt. And then her final position in state government, a career of 27 years, was as the energy advisor to Governor having a bad moment, John Huntsman. And then she retired in 2007. We went on a Dartmouth geology group trip to a lake in northern Maine in August, and everything seemed fine. It's just a total out of the blue shock. And Dennis and I were visiting the other day, and we got talking a little bit, and I think it's clear that during the time that she was in state government here, she was actually probably the most powerful woman in state government. And that may be true even during the time when we had a lieutenant governor who was a woman. She was a person who was able to bridge all kinds of issues and get people together. There was an article about her in last Thursday's Tribune by Brian Maffley, and her obituary was in yesterday's paper. So there will be a public memorial service on December 14th at the Jewish Community Center, and anybody who knew her or is interested, more than welcome to attend that. So, thanks.
Thank you, Mark, for doing that. Bill Lund, would you come up and introduce our speaker? The first introduction. This is going to be a couple introductions. So.
Thank you, Peter. I announced that Grant was the winner of the Hintze Award at the last meeting, and I said that I didn't realize that being a nominator came with a public speaking penalty. I certainly didn't realize it came with two, but I am honored to be here to honor Grant. And my own personal opinion is that the Hintze Award is as good as it gets. And I personally am honored to have been one of those. You may have seen my picture flash by, and I consider it better than anything else I've gotten. And I am so pleased that Grant, is going to get it. And I'm going to take a minute and read the letter of nomination, because I've been going through my head trying to figure out how I could say all the good things that need to be said about Grant, and I just can't remember them all. There's just too many. And if you wait for Grant to toot his own horn, you'll wait forever. I mean, he won't ever say a word. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to read the letter of nomination that I, Pete Rowley, Bart Kowalis, and Dave Hacker put together to nominate Grant for this award. The Utah Geological Association Lehigh Hintze Award is presented annually to the person considered to be the most deserving candidate, reflecting an outstanding contribution to the geology of Utah. The author and supporters of this nomination believe that few, if any, geologists working in Utah today have made a greater contribution to the knowledge of Utah's geology, both as a working geologist and as a geologic administrator, than has Grant Willis. Grant's contributions in the areas of geologic mapping and deciphering the basic geologic framework of Utah are unsurpassed and exemplify the highest intent of this award. We believe that Grant's contributions in these fields have set a high standard that will endure for many years. Based on his stellar 30-plus year career and unsurpassed contribution to the understanding of Utah's geology, we, the undersigned, respectfully submit this letter of nomination for consideration for the Lehigh Hintze Award for Grant C. Willis. Among Grant's significant contributions, as a geologic mapper, Grant has been a prolific scientist and is the lead or co-author on more than 50 geologic maps of various scales in all parts of Utah. His mapping has included geologic units of all ages, ranging from nearly undeformed stratified sedimentary rocks, including large coal deposits, to high-grade metamorphic rocks, igneous, tufaceous, and mafic rocks, and structurally complex terrain with thrust faults, salt diaphyrs, dissolution structures, and extensional faults. As an engineering geologist, I'm not sure what that means. One need only pursue the list of Grant's publications that accomplishes this nomination to see the breadth and depth of his accomplishments as a geologic mapper. As a geologic administrator, Grant has managed the geologic mapping program at the Utah Geological Survey for the past, took a while to get you in here, Grant. I think I says 21 years. I think it's 23 or 4 now. During his tenure in that position, Grant has supervised the publication of more than 320 geologic maps and many dozens of geologic reports, and made thorough technical reviews of more than 450 additional maps and reports. His technical reviews alone are worth their weight in gold. They are comprehensive in scope and have added significantly to the clarity and accuracy of hundreds of geologic maps and reports. Grant managed the development and the advancement of digital geologic mapping at the UGS, a program that is now recognized by state geological surveys nationwide as one of the most advanced and innovative programs in the nation. Grant has written many successful grant proposals to fund continuing geologic map in Utah. The annual geologic mapping program in some years has exceeded $1 million. During his tenure as program manager, Grant has secured nearly $4.3 million. This is out of date again, probably over 5 by now, Grant, from the U.S. Geological Survey State Map Program, with significant funding also coming from the National Park Service, the Department of Defense, and other sources. 2 of his proposals were ranked by the U.S. Geological Survey as the best proposals submitted among the 50 state geological surveys in their representative years. In terms of service to our profession, Grant has given back to his profession and to the society in many ways. He is a charter life member of the Utah Geological Association and served as president in 2013 and 14 and as program chair in 2000 and 2001. He was the lead editor on UGA Guidebook 36, Central Utah, Diverse Geology of a Dynamic Landscape in 2007. During his tenure as UGA president, Grant created the UGA Earthquake Safety Committee, working with local officials and engineers to address the impending disaster posed by Utah's unreinforced masonry building stock. Over the years, Grant has led or contributed to numerous geologic field trips for the UGA, UGS, and other organizations, including multiple trips for the GSA, AAPG, ExxonMobil, AASG, and the UGS Board of Directors. He has been the driving force behind annual field reviews of new geologic mapping, helping to expose new maps to a broad audience. Additionally, he served for 6 years on the Utah State University Geology Department Advisory Board and has been involved with the Boy Scouts of America for more than 20 years. Through his letters of support and insightful reviews in the field and of materials submitted for publication, Grant has been a strong supporter of the UGS Geologic Survey EdMap program, helping many aspiring geologists map and publish new geologic maps throughout Utah. I think there are few people that can surpass Grant's record to advancing Utah geology. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Grant Willis.
Grant, oh, take this out of the plastic. So quick question, how many previous winners are here? Why don't you stand up? I want to see this proud crowd that you're joining today. Look at that. So, I've known Grant for many, many years, and Julie both. So anyway, with pleasure, I can give you this plaque that you can hang wherever you want. Display it proudly for the family, okay? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Schlenker. I'm the program chair for the 2019 UGA sessions. And so I'm going to give you just a little bit more information about Grant. At least it's what he submitted to me, so this is a little more of a personal basis. before he begins his talk on geologic maps, the strengths and challenges in a digital world. Fascinated by mountains surrounding his childhood home of Lost River Valley of south central Idaho, the first course that Grant Willis signed up for in 1975 at Ricks College was physical geology. Each geology class was better than the last, and he never even considered another career. Following an LDS mission in Spain, he earned a BS and MS degrees in geology from Brigham Young University. For his master's thesis, he mapped a coal-filled quadrangle in Utah's eastern Book Cliffs with partial funding from the Utah Geological Survey, UGMS, back then. In 1983, with the thesis nearly completed, Grant applied for a position in the newly created Utah Geological Survey mapping program. He has always been grateful to state geologist Genevieve Atwood and mapping program manager Helmut Dolling for giving a young mapper a chance. His first assigned area was the Salina Quadrangle in central Sevier Valley. With a head-scratching enigma around every corner, Sevier Valley remains his favorite geology in the state. In addition, he has mapped quadrangles in the eastern Book Cliffs on Antelope Island, in Zion National Park, St. George area, in the Lake Powell Glen Canyon National Recreation Area, and now at the end of his career, back in the Sevier Valley. In 1965, when Helmut retired, Grant applied for a position of mapping program manager, which he has held for nearly 25 years. In 2017, the paleontology group was added to his management duties. Grant has authored or co-authored over 50 geologic maps and has reviewed, revised, supervised, or ghost authored several hundred more maps covering nearly all of the state. He views his work as his largest contribution, and he attributes this award to all the devoted authors of the maps that he helped bring to publication. Grant served as the Utah Geological Association program chair and president, and has written or co-authored papers for UGA publications and co-led several UGA field trips. He also has led several field trips for the GSA and AAPG and several large oil companies. Grant has long been concerned that Utah is not doing enough to save lives predicted to be lost in its 200,000 unreinforced masonry buildings in the inevitable next big earthquake. While UGA president, he started the Utah Earthquake Committee called GEEQS. Is that geeks? Geologists and engineers for earthquake safety, and wrote and designed the UGA-sponsored website, UtahEarthquakeSafety.org, and remains active in this effort. As if that isn't enough geology, Grant's wife, Julie, is a geology professor at BYU, Brigham Young University, Idaho. They have a wonderful life together, exploring the world's geology from Alaska, her dissertation, to Guatemala, to Switzerland, and driving their 3 kids crazy by stopping at many a road cut. Join me in greeting Grant.
Let's see if we can get rid of these slides here. I'm sure you're tired of them. I am. Okay. I actually don't know where this is on here, because this is not my laptop. Oh, here we go. All right, might be okay. Hey, I think we did it. That's amazing. Technology and I do not get along. I was meant to be born in the 1800s, I'm pretty sure. Well, I had no idea I'd done all those things, Bill. I don't know how you found all of those, but.
I'll tell you what, could you please update your resume? You have no idea how hard Julie worked.
Then you might need a job.
I may, yeah. Well, I am truly honored and humbled. I was shocked. I was not expecting this. I thought, well, maybe sometime when I'm 80 or something like that, but I think the beard sold me out because I keep telling people, hey, I'm too young for this, and nobody believes me for some reason. But I have to tell you, I truly admire all of the people who have received this award in the past, and it's a tremendous honor to be associated with every one of you. I mean, they're all my heroes. They really are. And I want to thank Bill and Pete and everybody who nominated me. I know it's a lot of work because I've done it, and I really appreciate that. You know what? I'm going to get my clock here so I can get you home before too late. We started quite a bit later than I thought we would, so I'm going to have to kind of replan here. I may skip a few slides, and if I jump over things, it's intentional. You know, more than probably almost all the past recipients of this award, I recognize this is a team award. This is not just my award. This is a team. Because I'm really being recognized for all of those 400 some odd maps that we have moved through the system over the last 37 years. And that represents a lot of authors, but not just authors, but people behind the scenes too. I'm a fool to even start to name names, but I'm going to name a few. I mean, Bob, Doug, Don, John, Zach, Adam, they're our mappers right now. But all those former people, Janice, Lehigh, Helmut, Paul, Pete, Bart, Adolph, Bob, Oaks, who's here. I mean, so many more. I can't even start to name them all. And then there's the people like Pete Kilborn, who support us behind the scenes. He's the chair of our SMAC committee, our Geologic Mapping Advisory Committee, or State Mapping Advisory Committee. And then there's all of the people. I've worked with Kent Brown for 37 years nearly now, building, I don't know how many maps together, Kent, but it's a lot. And Kent is awesome. Basha for over 20 years, and so many others who are the people who get the work done behind the scenes. So I know I'm kind of up here getting the awards and honors, but I recognize that this is everybody. Mapping is the state of Utah. It's kind of like building a city, one board at a time. And every single mapper and every single person who's worked on this adds one more board. There's a few, like Pete and Bob and Helmut, who add a whole subdivision. But, there's others besides them too. How many people get to be boss of their boss or boss of their former professor? I've been both. I got to be boss of Lehigh Hintze for about 10 years and boss of Helmut Doling for about 10 years and then supervisor of Helmut for 25 more, right, Helmut? Yeah. But I know I have never been their boss. It hasn't happened. Okay. Well, I want to thank my wife who's supported me for all of these years. It's been a wonderful life together, and as my kids know, we have built our life around family and around geology, and they go together very, very well. It's been a lot of fun. I'm so grateful. We've already introduced them, so I won't do that again, but so grateful to have all of my family here with me. And I think my mother is actually listening from her rest home up in Idaho. And some of my siblings may be as well. So it's really an honor for me. Well, I got my bug in geology at a very early age. I grew up in the Lost River Valley of Idaho. Not quite sure how I'm going to run this. Let's see if I can do it from here. It's a very special place to grow up. It's for a very sparsely populated valley. It's actually quite famous among geologists. Of course, most geologists know it for the Bora Peak earthquake. Is this not going to work? There we go. Okay, I got it. So, yeah, the Bora Peak earthquake. That's the analog for the Wasatch Fault, right there. And the shaking that they experienced up there in that valley, those dozen people who live there, based on that, it's going to be bad here. It truly is. And so, you know, we take that serious. If you don't know it from that, okay. There we go. You know it from craters of the moon. We used to have a ball playing around there as kids. And if you don't know it from craters of the moon, you certainly know it from the numbers on the hill, which everybody cringes at nowadays, right? But we didn't know the word environmental back in those days. And it was a real important rite of passage as you moved from your junior to your senior year. You climbers would cringe at how we did this. We would go and borrow some haystack tie-down ropes from some farmers, tie a rubber tire on it and a bucket of paint, and lower a classmate over the cliff. It's very true. And I understand they are using real climbing gear nowadays, but the Forest Service designated this mountain as a historic area for this purpose because they knew they were never going to put a stop to it. Okay. And if you don't know it from that, you certainly know Blizzard Mountain Ski Resort. This is where I grew up skiing from age about 4. And my dad and 2 of his buddies built this place from old worn out parts that they bummed off of Beaver Mountain down by Logan, Utah. Hauled them up there and set this up. And it was a wonderful place to ski. And the cool thing about it, with that uphill capacity, you never ran out of powder. Guaranteed. And it didn't really matter because on old lace-up boots and cable bindings and wooden warp skis, I couldn't ski powder anyway, so. And if you don't know it from that, you certainly know it from this. Arco was the first city in the world lit by atomic power, 2 years before I was born. Okay, 2 political commentaries in this talk here. One of them is this: we're never going to beat climate change until we endorse nuclear power. I know, throw the tomatoes right now, but it is very, very true. There is no alternative energy source that's going to produce energy in the quantities we need to move away from hydrocarbons. Okay, there's my commentary. I'll move on. And lastly, everybody knows Pickles Place. It's amazing how many people around the West know about this place and love their burgers. Okay. Well, I got my first taste for geology working here at the Arco Feed and Fertilizer for many years as a teenager. Did a lot of different jobs. One of my jobs, though, was to haul coal out to all the farmhouses in the fall. And I actually liked that job a lot more than a lot of the other jobs I had. But one of the fun things was people who loved to have me back across their lawn and put foot-deep ruts in their grass and smash their lilac trees because they were so grateful to get the coal. And so, but the thing of it is, they always knew they needed 10 tons of coal to get through the winter, and their coal bins would only hold 8. So I would have to go around through the basement, crawl into their coal bins, and lay on my side with the roof like right there, and shovel the coal over into the corners of the coal bin to get 10 tons into those coal bins. So I know I have breathed much more coal dust than most coal miners do in a lifetime. So when I die of black lung, you know why. Okay. Well, that is not actually where I got my first love of geology. This right here, with all the trees, that's our farmstead where I grew up. My uncle's is the trees across the street right there. And starting at about 8 or 9 years old, like all farm kids, I spent hundreds, if not thousands of hours in the seat of a tractor. And going back and forth, up and down fields is boring. I can tell you that. How many did you burn up? I only burned up one tractor. That was my dad's. Burned it right to the ground. But anyway, I got really bored, so I would stare off at the mountains and see pictures or scenes like this, or this, or this. And I did not know much about rocks, but I knew rocks should not be doing that. And I always wondered how those rocks got that way. It made no sense to me, but it baffled me. So anyway, when I went off to Rick's College, like every other kid, we went into this gigantic room with a sign that hung down with every major on it. In those days, you'd go around and pull a card for every class you took. There was one table over in the corner with a sign that said undecided on it. And there was a massive mob of kids around that table. This poor lady stood up just as I walked in the room, and she just said, if any of you have any interest in anything else, go to their table. So I looked around the room, and there was a sign that said geology, and I said, I wonder how those rocks got like that. So I walked over to the geology table, and the rest is history. And I was thrilled in class later that semester when my professor showed a picture of thrust faults in the Lost River Range and told us what they were. So, mission accomplished. All right. Well, like I say, one of the thrills of my life has been able to share geology with my dear wife. It's been such a fun run, and we still have a ball going out and doing geology. We've done a lot of things from road cuts to trips, long trips, short trips. But when our kids started to get growing up a little more, she went back to finish her dream, which was to get her PhD at the U. The right professor for her was Ron Brune. Ron does his research in Alaska, so Julie ended up doing a dissertation on the surface deformation of shallow subducting plates inboard of the, they're between Anchorage and the Denali Range. And so that was her dissertation. One of the funnest things we got to do, though, was work. You remember the 2002 earthquake, November 3rd, if I remember right? 7.9, a huge earthquake. It was really two earthquakes, back to back. One was a strike slip, and the other was compressional, a thrust. And so Ron got a grant to work on the compressional, the thrust fault part of the earthquake. And so we had a deal with the USGS. They would give us helicopter rides. Oh, there we are with Ron, taking a break. Right. And in exchange, we would help them dig a trench, because there was no way to do it other than by hand. So that was our deal. It was a great deal. And we worked on that thrust valve. But I wish every geology student in the world could see this, because it is one of the most cool things you've ever seen in your life. There's the thrust fault right there. And there's the scarp. It took that tundra and just rolled it up like carpet. And you could see that in cross-section where the streams crossed the scarp in a few places. This was, about 8 months later, 10 months later, when we were doing the profiling. And that entire thing above my head is scarp. Just a single event scarp, too. Okay, well, so as you know, I'm a mapper. Only I found out a couple of years ago I've been doing it all wrong. And this is how I found out. My wife brought me home this quote from a field camp evaluation from one of their students. These exercises are not what we are going to be doing in our careers. Professional mapping is not trudging through thickets, sagebrush, and forests in search of anything we can find. We had no way of correlating the data gathered, and we were required to submit professional maps from what we observed. That is the best description I've ever found of my job, right there. Okay. You know what enthralls all of us geologists? It's that the earth is dynamic. It's not like an anvil. You know, I grew up as a kid. I knew rocks were hard. I hit my head on them enough times from bike wrecks and everything else to know that rocks are hard. So the fact that the earth moves, that lava comes oozing out of the ground, chasing people down the road, that rocks slide down mountains, that rocks are shoved or slide 50 miles, Bob? Is that really possible? You know, the depositional environments change. It's so exciting to every geologist. Geology is really about time. That's what geology is about. And so I have just loved that. You know, as I went to national meetings, I would often use this as my opening slide, just to rub it in a little bit, you know? I had a professor who said that geology is like an ice cream sundae, and geologic mapping is like the cherry on top. Well, mapping in Utah is like a whole banana split. You cannot get any better than that. Utah is the greatest place on earth to do geology. Well, and I've had the opportunity to map a lot of different places around the state, and we have tremendous diversity of geology, and it all shows that diversity, that time, the dynamic element, which is always so fun to work with. Well, what I want to do is I know I don't have much time, but just very briefly, just throw out a few of the areas where I've mapped. And how can you beat Zion National Park, right? I mean, the scenery is spectacular. So I spent a lot of time mapping between Zion and St. George down through that strip. And all the geology is great there. Just one thing that was really fun to work on, though, were the basalts. You've all seen them, you've driven through them, the inverted topography, the basalts on top of those ridges. It looks so straightforward when you drive through it at 80 miles an hour, but it's not. It's very complex, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to work it out. And it's really fun to try to sort out the sources and the relative ages of all of those basalts. One of the ones that we were really intrigued with and working hard on was the Santa Clara flow. At one time, this was called the youngest flow in Utah, but it's not. It's actually not even close. But we wanted to get a good age on this flow. And so we spent, 3, 4, 5 years crawling under ledges and up washes and everywhere else we could, trying to figure out a way to get an age on it, because it's too young for traditional dating methods. Finally, we found that little piece of carbon right there under the edge of the flow, and we're able to get a good age on that, a carbon-14 age of about 26, 27,000 years. And then we followed that up with OSL dating, and came out just over 30. So this flow is just a little over 30,000 years old, and much older than the 1,000 to 10,000 that's in the literature before this. And it makes a lot more sense, really, with the weathering and the erosion around the edges of it. Okay, the other fascinating thing about that whole area are the geologic hazards, right? Everybody knows about those, I hope. Don't buy one of those building lots at the bottom of the slope. There's my message for today. Okay, and there are just a ton of other geologic hazards to be dealt with down there, and it's one of the reasons we are mapping in as much detail as we can down there. They need these maps. They need this information. Well, got to move on. Lake Powell. Another great place to map. Most people don't know that Glen Canyon National Recreation Area is actually only about 3% water and 97% land. But logistically, it is tough to work in. And all I can say is thank heavens that the National Park Service paid for the gas, because we burned a lot of gas doing this geologic mapping in boats on the lakes mostly, but not all. And again, wonderful experience. I could talk about a lot of different things. I thought I would just mention, there's Rainbow Bridge. The deformation in the Entrada sandstone, if you haven't seen that along the shores of Lake Powell, you need to go there just for that. It's spectacular. And this is soft sediment deformation. This big Aeolian erg came in over the top of very soft Carmel formation, loaded with gypsum and muds and clays, and that load caused a lot of soft sediment deformation that created these features. Just so fun to see around the lake. Here's one more of them. Another very fun thing that is maybe not quite so fun are the massive landslides that are happening today. Any place the lake water is in contact with the Chinle Formation, the wind gate doesn't like that so well. The wind gate just decides it's going to take off, and it's creeping into the lake in many, many different places with spectacular landslides that are really a big hazard and a big risk to the people who like to recreate down there. All right, well, we got to keep moving. Book cliffs. I love the book cliffs. A lot of people think that the book cliffs are named because of the shape of the cliffs. It's not that. In my opinion, they're named because they tell a 50 million year long story in spectacular form. It is just such a neat story to just be able to start at the bottom of the valley on the Mancos Shale and work your way through the entire regressive Cretaceous section and up into the Tertiary. And it's all so beautifully exposed. Those exposures also cause problems. My big challenges there were cliffs. Cliffs everywhere. I can't count the number of times I got boxed out by cliffs or had to backtrack down canyons and try a different way. I planned my traverses very, very carefully. But even then, I sometimes had to turn around, follow my way all the way back out and around. And I'll show you at the end one of my rules for geologic mapping, okay, based on that. One time, always near the end of the day, every story happens near the end of the day, you know, 1 hour before dark. I'm all the way around this huge long traverse, all the way back down within 200 yards of the road, and there's a cliff that I had not been able to see because of the trees on my air photos. And I figured, oh no, there's no way I could make it all the way back. I'm going to spend the night up here on the cliffs. Well, I worked my way along for quite a ways and found one big dead old snag that had fallen and leaned against the cliff. And I studied that for a long time and finally decided, yeah, I think I can do this. And I climbed down the snag and I succeeded, but I also made sure that I was confident I could climb back up it if there was yet another cliff below that one. So anyway, fun times out there. Bears were the other fun thing in the book cliffs. A lot of bears. There are more bears in the book cliffs, I'm convinced, than anywhere else in the state. And I ran into a lot of them, or their signs. And you know, and they never bothered me. Bears have never worried me in this state. When I'm up in grizzly country, I carry bear spray. I've never bothered in this state. But it was always interesting. One night, I camped up there a lot, and I usually just throw my sleeping bag in the back of a Ford Bronco I was using, take the seat out, throw it on the ground, and I'd sleep in there and save the hassle of a tent. But one night in the middle of the night, I hear a noise, and I sit up, and it's a bright moon out, and here, when I sit up, here goes a bear running across the meadow. And so I get out with my flashlight and look around, see what he's been doing. Well, he's been chewing on the back seat of my car, or my Bronco. Evidently, there was somebody's peanut butter sandwich there or something. I don't know. But another time, I was working up a little dry wash. It was real sandy, so really quiet. And it just happened that I was frustrated. I couldn't figure out where the contact was relative to where I was at. So I finally started to crawl out the side of the wash. And as I crawled out my side, here came a great big old black bear crawling out the other side. And another 20 steps, we would have been nose to nose as we came around the bend together. Because I could see that from the tracks. But anyway, so he looked at me, I looked at him, and we both just went our own direction. But, you know, it was always interesting mapping in the book cliffs. Antelope Island. Man, this is the greatest outdoor classroom in the state of Utah. I hope every student gets to go there with a professor that is able to explain what they're seeing out there. It's just incredible, and we're so fortunate to have it in the state park system. We mapped it in the 80s when the lake was near record high, and so the causeways were flooded, so we took state park boats over most of the time. When we got frustrated with those guys never going on time, we finally started just taking the state plane out. And the state plane would just fly us out there and dump us off on one of the roads, and then we'd spend the week out there, and then they'd come pick us up. It was great. It was like in the Serengeti, having the whole island to ourselves. But the interesting thing is the bison were not very used to people like they are now. And they would get real antsy when we would get close to them. And, you know, it was always interesting to come over a rise, and here's a big old bull. And their brain, you've been around them, their brain operates about the speed of the old Atari 64s. You remember those? Cows are about the same, right? And so they would stand up and they would look at you and they decide, am I going to just take this guy out or am I going to walk off? And you could see all that going through their brain, you know. And you're kind of carefully backing up and they're looking at you and then they just wander off. But it was always fun to be out there. But the geology, of course, is the cool thing. Nothing cooler than the geology on Antelope Island, really. And it's the shearing, the retrograde metamorphism from the Cretaceous severe orogeny that makes that a really special place. There on the left, those big boulders are quartzites. Those long, skinny, pencil-shaped things are also boulders. Those are the gneisses and granites that just got sheared out until, like I say, they're the shape of a pencil. Okay, well, like I said, I've mapped in really beautiful places around the state, but my favorite geology is still central Utah. Like, there is some crazy, messed up geology around every corner in that valley. And it never, I mean, that's why I'm losing my hair, is the geology of Sevier Valley. I mean, look at that picture. You want to map that stuff? You know, I do. It's fun. It really is fun to get out there and try to figure it out. But there's always been so much debate. I've said that Central Sevier Valley has been argued over more than any other part of the state, and I think that's really true. And when I got dumped in there as a rod geologist in '83, it was being argued over then, and it still is. I mean, there's just stuff like this everywhere. Look at that fold. What is going on there? Well, you know, a lot of the argument hinges back to this. This is a cross-section that came about from really the oil and gas work down there. It wasn't our surface mapping that really proved what was going on. It's deep in the subsurface. But it is thrust belt geology. That's a big forward thrust and a set of back thrusts, creating a duplex zone right there. And a lot of that surface deformation that's the framework to create it. But there's a problem. Most of the deformation you see at the surface is in tertiary rocks that are way too young to have been deformed by thrusting or back thrusting. So how do you explain that? Well, part of the answer is this: salt. That's flow banding, vertical flow banding there on the right. And a lot of the deformation is due to salt, but not all of it is. There's still a lot more going on down there, and it's just fun. You know, every time we go down there, we find another problem. Bob and I were down there 2 weeks ago trying to sort out the volcanic stratigraphy. And sorry, Helmut, but we've got a name wrong on our map. We're convinced now. So it just keeps going on. And that's what makes geology so fun. How many people can say they can put their entire career on one slide? Well, I can. That is my career right there in a nutshell. I've worked on some way on every map on the left side, half of the maps that are on the right there. Well, I'm going to come to that in a second. Utah was first mapped in as far back as 1855. This map by Marcoux was done during the early railroad surveys. Interesting story. He was a Frenchman. He took all of his information and was headed back to France, and the government grabbed it at the very last minute. So he heard they were coming, and he desperately was making copies of everything he had collected. Anyway, long story short, he took it back to France and published the first geologic map of the United States, all labeled in French, in a German publication. Okay. Well, the first real field mapping was done by the four Western Great Surveys. John Wesley Powell, we credit him with the first true geologic map of Utah. This, you probably recognize Split Mountain. This is the Green River country over there. By 1879, most of the state had been covered, had been mapped. Pretty amazing in my mind. So from that point on, all of us are doing is just trying to fix all the problems. So we don't get to do new mapping. I got to give a shout out at this point to the universities. Universities have been hugely important in geologic mapping. And about 20% of the total maps in our database were done by professors and their students. There's been a lot of map series started over the years, and not a one of them has been completed. And in fact, my one goal for my career is to complete one of these series. So first, the 7.5 minute quadrangle series. That's about where we stand in geologic mapping. About 800 have been completed, but unfortunately, about 600 of those need to be done over again. Right now, we're working on the Wasatch front area and doing a real focused effort right here and improving a lot of these maps and trying to get them all out in GIS. 3060s, this is my series. This is the one I want to see done before I kick the bucket. And all of the mappers that I work with know that, so they're trying hard. But when I started in '85, that's where we stood. Not a single one of those. Obviously, I'm not talking about being the author or the co-author of most of those. I just had my hands on them at some point in their process. This is where we stand today, more or less. Those are our current projects. They're in red. The blue ones are where we've got GIS going on of older geologic maps, trying to fill in some of those holes temporarily until we can get new mapping going. And some of those old maps, I just wanted to show you one example of taking an old map and putting it into GIS and suddenly making it readable. So, and the real credit for this, a lot of this goes to our GIS people who are doing a tremendous job on these projects. Some of those old maps are really tough. Well, we are not going to run out of work for geologic mappers. All you young guys who are mappers or want to be mappers, you can relax. There's work left for you to do, I promise. And the uses of geologic maps just keep growing. And they are going to continue to grow as population grows and we move more and more into areas where there are problems. A lot of challenges on old maps. I don't know if you can see the contacts on this map from where you're sitting or not, but they actually fit pretty good until you start to zoom in. You start to zoom in and you start to see some problems. You zoom in a little more and you see a lot of problems. You see where that contact goes? You go, what was this guy thinking? Well, I can tell you what he was thinking. He was thinking, what are these ugly black and white aerial photographs I'm using telling me? And you couldn't see a thing on those old air photos. So it's not surprising that contacts ended up like this or that. I have no clue what they were trying to draw their contacts on here. I can't even figure out what their map units are on this map. So we've got a lot of old maps to redo. Here's one more example. Some old 1996 mapping, and then 20 years later, all the improvement, and mostly that improvement is due to better photogrammetric techniques, better technology, and colored imagery. Just wanted to show you one. This is one that Bob has worked on. This is the Park City east or west, Bob? East, I think. Yeah, out at the freeway, or Highway 40 out there. Anyway, so the old map was really good. Nobody's really complaining about the old map, but there is so much room for improvement. So in a way, I feel like we're going backwards. We got more old maps to do over than I think we did when I started my career. Improper use of the maps. I just wanted to show you. This is kind of a funny story. This was emailed to me and asked me, what in the world's going on here? It turns out this was a site investigation for a building lot, just one building lot. And what the owner did was he knew a little bit about geology, so he started bringing in all the GIS layers he could. What we're really looking at there is 3 different versions of geologic maps for the same place. We've got enough faults in this state as it is. We don't need to triple them. And so, you know, there's a fault everywhere. And unfortunately, as I look at that closely, not a one of the geologic maps is right. So we need to do that one over too. Okay, seamless maps. Everybody asks me, why can't we produce a seamless map database? The answer really is very simple. You don't decrease the quality of the newer map. So when you have that rule as your rule number 1, what are you going to do? Either you've got to go back and map through all that old quadrangle, the adjacent map, or you leave the problems. And we believe in leaving the problems and not hiding them. Here's one example where I tried to fix the older map. We did the Escalante quad back in the 90s. Then Bob came in and did the Panguitch quad, and we didn't match up very good. So I went back in and remapped all along the border of the Escalante quad. I made it look good. It looks like a nice fit, but really all I was doing was shifting the problem inboard. You know, so we don't do that anymore. Just a word on Geologic Map Tools. There's some tremendous new map tools out there, and encourage you to use it. If you haven't explored our website, we just revamped our website, and credit to Marshall and McKinsey and all the others working on that. But there's some really great tools that they created to help you find and use geologic maps. So, just nearing the end now. What's happening? What's the future look like? The future looks like remapping old maps, GIS databases, hopefully seamless databases. I'd actually like to work on some of those seam problems for my retirement, just for fun. And this, a new 3D mapping initiative. This is a national effort. It's really being pushed by the guys back in Minnesota and Ohio and places like that, which will really, all it is really glorified GIS, where you bring all of your data of every type together and put it in a common language so it can talk to each other. It works pretty well in areas like Ohio and Minnesota. All I have to do is say basin and range, and you know the problems we've got. We need 100 times more drill holes to even start to figure out what we would put in that 3D database in the basin and range. So there will be funding for this. We hope to get working on it, but it's going to be a long road for Utah. Okay, enough about geologic mapping. I just have to throw in one plug right here. It was already mentioned in the introduction. URMs are our #1 problem in this state. Not just geologic problem, really. It's more of an engineering problem, if you want to be absolutely honest. We could literally end up with the worst natural disaster the United States has ever experienced. It's possible, theoretically possible. We need to be doing more. We've got our website running thanks to the UGA support. We get 100 hits a month on it, which is good, but it's not good enough. So we kind of started a new group up. Our #1 goal is to prevent the legislators from sleeping at night. If we can accomplish that, we've done our goal. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay, well, in closing, time to wrap up. I just had to throw this out. The worst nightmares of a mapper: cheatgrass, oak brush, no trespassing signs. I won't talk about, I don't want to incriminate myself, so I'm not going to go there. And map units that all look the same. Any others, Bob or Don, Doug, you want to add to that list? Safflower. What's that? Safflower. Safflower? Yeah. Depends on what part of the state you're in, right? Okay, well, we have good memories out there. Nothing like cold water on a hot day. A breeze. I have made my vows that I will never cuss the wind. And I've stuck to that. No matter how awful the wind's been at times, I will never cuss a good wind on a hot day. Finding a trail when you're bushwhacking. Nothing better than breaking through that oak brush, and aha, here's a cow trail. And figuring out what formation you're in. Okay, a little bit of wisdom from an old mapper. Shortcuts are never shortcuts. One last story and then I'm done. Down mapping in central Utah in the Valley Mountains, I drive in on the county road, go way south on these little 2 tracks, do my work, come out at the end of the day, and I look on my photos and there's this 2-track heading right down a wash and right out into the valley. And I go, man, that's saved me a lot of miles. So I start down this 2-track. And it looked pretty good on the photos, I gotta say, I did look. Well, it got worse and worse and worse. And at some point I realized I am never backing out of here. And I'm in a narrow little wash like this. And so I keep going down, and finally I'm starting to feel good. I'm going to make it out of here. I come around a bend, and here's a huge boulder, half the size of a truck, that is slumped down into the left track. I figured I was going to be backpacking my truck out of there, one piece at a time. I mean, I couldn't believe it. Well, fortunately, that particular time I did have a shovel. And I went to work on that bank, on the right bank, and I shoveled and I dug and I moved all that dirt over against the base of that boulder. And finally, I thought I could do it. I got in my truck and crept forward, and I actually crawled out the window a couple of times because the doors were blocked, of course, and measured everything, eyeballed everything, crept forward a little bit. Somehow I fit through this space that a four-wheeler shouldn't fit through and got out of there. So there's my number one word of wisdom. Shortcuts are never shortcuts. Never climb down something that you can't climb back up. Don't cliff yourself out. Never pass up a chance to take a strike and dip. That came from Fitzhugh Davis. Nowadays, I think we'd say never pass up a chance to collect a waypoint and jot down a note. And lastly, from Lehigh Hintze, the namesake of this award, every map is a progress report. There's more left to be done. Well, I dedicated a book to Helmut some 25 years ago, and I said, I bet you when he's 90, he's still going to be mapping. He's almost 90, and he's still mapping. And Helmut, I want to be just like you. I love mapping. And that's one of the crazy things I saw one day when we were working on Antelope Island. All right.
We'd like to thank Grant for coming and speaking, and I'm glad you got the award, Grant. You're definitely deserving.
Thank you.
I think we have a little bit of time for a couple of questions, if we have any questions.
Yeah, if anybody wants to ask a question. I didn't give any real science there, so I don't know where you could ask a question. But other than I still don't know what's going on in Sevier Valley, if you want to ask that.
When you do, let me know.
Yeah.
I'll give Grant one more round of applause.
I was just gonna say, we got cake over here, Grant's favorite. I didn't hear what it was, but it's his favorite.
Triple chocolate with roasted almonds on it.
There it is. Okay? Come over here and socialize with him and his family over here. We got punch and cake over there, please. Thank you for coming. Huh? I'll get a knife.